There's a quiet betrayal happening inside you, and it's not coming from the outside world. It's coming from within. Every time you choose to be agreeable instead of being authentic, every time you nod when your soul screams no, you hand over a piece of your dignity in exchange for something fragile and fleeting, approval. But here's the brutal truth. No one told you. Being liked is not the same as being respected. You can be liked by everyone and still be walked over. You can be praised, applauded, and invited to every room, but never truly heard. Because the moment you make approval your compass, you lose direction. You stop being a person with depth and become a shape others mold to fit their comfort. Machiavelli saw it centuries ago. He studied men not as saints, but as they are, flawed, selfish, emotional, dangerous. And what did he find? That the person who tries to please everyone becomes disposable to all. Why? Because people don't respect those who bend too easily. They don't value what always says yes. And they certainly don't admire the ones who water themselves down just to keep the peace. Instead, they respect mystery, firmness, boundaries, distance, the one who dares to say no without fear, the one who chooses to remain silent, not out of submission, but out of power. That's where true presence begins, not in your volume, not in your charm, but in your refusal to abandon yourself. And yet, most people are terrified of this truth. We grow up being told that being nice is the goal. That fitting in will protect us. That if we're just kind enough, tolerant enough, soft enough, everyone will accept us. But Machiavelli would tell you this. If your strategy is to be loved at the cost of being respected, you have already surrendered your throne. He didn't write for the weak-hearted. He didn't romanticize the world. He told us that human nature responds to strength more than kindness, to mystery more than clarity, to certainty more than apologies. And that's what you're forgetting. You think your politeness will earn you loyalty. You think your constant agreement will keep you safe. You think that avoiding conflict will make people treat you better. But in reality, you're training them to ignore you. You're teaching them that you'll fold under pressure, that your yes is cheap, that you don't mind being overlooked, as long as you're included. And that Machiavelli would call a social suicide. Because when people see that your self-worth depends on their approval, you become predictable. And in the game of power, predictability is weakness. Predictability makes you replaceable. It makes your presence feel less like power and more like background noise. That's why so many people feel invisible, even when they're always around. Because respect isn't about showing up all the time. It's about showing up on your own terms. So ask yourself, when did being liked become more important than being heard? When did you start measuring your worth by how comfortable others feel around you? Because if everyone is comfortable with you, you're probably not standing for anything. Machiavelli didn't say, be cruel. He said, be firm, be strategic, be less available. Not to play games, but to remind people that your presence has weight, that your time, your mind, your emotional space are not public property. They are earned, not assumed. And if you're constantly worried that someone won't like you, pause and consider, Why do you need their liking more than your own self-respect? Because here's what Machiavelli knew, and what most people never learn. When you chase approval, you lose the ability to lead. You become a mirror, reflecting back what others want to see. But when you stop chasing and start standing, something incredible happens. People pause, they pay attention, they adjust. Not because you demanded it, but because you embodied it. Respect doesn't come from being liked. It comes from being unshakable in your self-worth. And that, Machiavelli warned, is the first line you must never cross. There's a moment just before you answer, when you hesitate. You feel the urge to explain, to soften your words, to add a disclaimer. I don't mean to sound harsh, but I could be wrong, but I'm just saying this because I care. And in that one moment, you hand over your power. Not because you're wrong, not because you're unkind, but because you feel the need to justify your very existence. This is the second humiliating mistake Machiavelli would warn you against. The compulsion to over-explain. You think it helps people understand you better. You believe you're building bridges. You assume that giving more context will earn you grace, clarity, or maybe even acceptance. But the truth, every unnecessary explanation is a quiet confession. I don't believe my word stands on its own. Machiavelli didn't teach us to be loud. He taught us to be measured. He understood that the more you explain, the more ground you lose, because you're teaching people that they are entitled to your inner world, that your thoughts need permission to exist, that your emotions are up for debate. And once you start doing that, people stop listening to your words and start searching for the weakness in your delivery. Over-explaining does not earn you empathy. It invites judgment. Let me ask you, why do you feel the need to explain why you're tired, why you're sad, why you didn't answer that message right away, why you said no to something that didn't feel right? You're not giving context, you're asking for permission. And Machiavelli would call that a crack in your armor. Because the moment you start justifying your boundaries, they stop being boundaries. They become requests. And people don't respect requests. They test them. What would a powerful person do? They would say less. Not to hide, but to protect. Not to manipulate, but to control access. Because not everyone deserves to hear your thoughts. Not everyone deserves to understand your silence. Not everyone has earned the right to touch the reasons behind your emotions. You are not a documentary. You are not a manual. You are a mystery, and mystery is power. Machiavelli knew that silence unsettles people more than any speech ever could. That restraint, calculated silence, creates presence. Because when you speak only when necessary, every word becomes a signal. Every gesture becomes meaningful, and every pause becomes unforgettable. But we've been raised to believe the opposite. We're told that clear communication means constant explaining. We're taught to over-apologize, to soften every emotion with a smile, to offer disclaimers just for being human. So what happens? You become readable, predictable, forgettable. The more you explain, the less they listen. The more they listen, the less they remember, because nothing you say hits with weight. It's all padded, diluted, packaged in fear. And here's what stings the most. Even when you explain everything perfectly, They'll still misinterpret you if they want to, because over-explaining doesn't protect you from being misunderstood. It just exposes you. Machiavelli would say, "The wise man speaks only when the cost of silence is greater." So when you feel that urge to defend, explain, or over-clarify, ask yourself, is this about truth or is this about fear? And if it's fear, pause. Hold your silence. Let the discomfort do the talking, because the most powerful people in the room are rarely the ones who talk the most. They're the ones whose silence demands attention. In a world addicted to noise, the one who masters silence becomes unforgettable. So stop narrating your life to people who haven't earned the right to listen. You don't need to explain your standards. You don't need to justify your peace. You don't need to make your no sound polite just to be accepted. Stand, decide, and leave the space open, because those who truly respect you won't need the explanation, and those who demand one, they were never listening anyway. You think being there for everyone makes you reliable. You think answering every message immediately makes you kind. You think showing up to every plan, saying yes to every favor, and never missing a beat makes you valuable. But Machiavelli would tell you, you've made a fatal mistake, because the third humiliation is this. You made yourself too available, not out of power, but out of fear. Fear of being forgotten, fear of being left out, fear that if you're not constantly present, you'll stop mattering. But here's the cruel paradox. The more available you are, the less you're valued. Your constant presence becomes background noise, expected, automatic, invisible. You don't command attention anymore. You blend into the scenery. Machiavelli believed that power does not lie in omnipresence. It lies in scarcity, in controlled presence, in knowing when to disappear and when to reappear with impact. Think about the people you respect the most. Do they always answer on the first ring? Do they show up to everything? Do they pour themselves out for everyone? Or do they move with selectiveness, with intentionality, with mystery? Because the one who can disappear without warning and still be remembered when they're gone, that's the one with power. But you show up to every birthday, every dinner, every late night conversation that drains your soul. You're always there, yet you feel more and more invisible. Why? Because presence without boundaries becomes servitude. You've mistaken being constant with being important. But in truth, you've taught others that you will always be around, no matter how they treat you. That is not loyalty. That is emotional desperation. Machiavelli would have called it self-destruction in slow motion, because when people believe you'll always say yes, they stop asking. When they know you'll never say no, they stop respecting. And when they know you'll explain, forgive, and stay, they begin to treat you like an object, not a person. Here's what they'll never say to your face. Your overpresence makes you predictable, and predictability in the social game of power is death. You want to be taken seriously? Start pulling away, not to punish, but to protect. Withdraw without drama, without loud exits. Just vanish. Let your absence teach the lesson your words never could. Because the truth is, you're not needed everywhere. You are not meant to be everyone's emotional charger. You're not built to be on call for every crisis that isn't yours. Machiavelli warned us, a man who tries to be everywhere ends up being nowhere. So learn to say no, to disappear, to go quiet. Let your distance disturb them. Let your silence be felt. Let the space you leave behind remind them who you are. Because real presence doesn't come from always being there. It comes from being missed. When you're not, you don't earn respect by being the easiest to reach. You earn it by being the hardest to replace. And when you stop making yourself endlessly accessible, something changes. The room watches when you enter. The phone feels heavier when it doesn't buzz. Your name becomes a weight, not just a sound. So no, you're not being selfish. You're being strategic. You're reclaiming your value. Because in this world, if you're always available, you're no longer desirable. You become common. And Machiavelli would tell you plainly, never allow yourself to become common. There's a moment that lives in silence. Someone interrupts you, dismisses your thoughts, makes a joke at your expense. You feel it in your gut, a small sting, but you smile. You let it slide because it's not worth starting a scene, right? You call it maturity. You call it emotional intelligence. But Machiavelli would call it what it really is: surrender. The fourth humiliating mistake is this: you tolerate disrespect just to keep the peace. But here's what no one tells you. Every time you let a boundary be crossed in silence, you teach the world that your dignity is negotiable. Every time you let someone walk over your line just this once, they learn that there is no line at all, and it never stops at one offense. It never stays at one disrespect, because people don't test you by accident. They test you to see how far they can go. Machiavelli understood the psychology of power. He knew that when authority is challenged and not corrected, that challenge grows. What starts as sarcasm turns to disregard. What begins as a small dig becomes a pattern of exclusion. And one day, you wake up and realize you're no longer being insulted, you're being ignored. And that's worse. You think you're avoiding conflict, but what you're really doing is inviting quiet humiliation. You're teaching people that you'll endure anything as long as it doesn't disturb the room, as long as no one raises their voice, as long as no one leaves upset. But peace at the expense of self-respect is not peace. It's self-erasure. And here's the thing: Machiavelli didn't promote cruelty. He promoted structure. He believed that people respond not to kindness, but to consequences. And if you want to stop being disrespected, it's not about screaming. It's not about confrontation. It's about making your presence a space where disrespect doesn't survive. That starts when you stop over-explaining. Stop forgiving the unforgivable. Stop laughing at jokes that cut too deep, and start choosing silence over tolerance. Let your withdrawal be the answer. Let your absence say what your mouth no longer needs to explain. Because when you no longer fight to fix what hurts you, the world learns that hurting you comes with a cost. The cost of losing access, the cost of losing energy, the cost of losing your presence. But most people don't do that. They explain, they justify, they become diplomats in wars. They didn't start trying to be the bigger person while they shrink themselves into pieces. And Machiavelli would tell you, The world does not reward the bigger person. It respects the one who understands when a line has been crossed and acts accordingly. You see, not every disrespect deserves a response, but it does deserve a boundary enforced not with words, but with action, a door that quietly closes and doesn't reopen. Because when someone shows you that they can dishonor you without consequence, they'll do it again, not because they're cruel, but because you showed them it's allowed. And this doesn't make you weak. This makes you human. We're taught from a young age to be understanding, to forgive quickly, to accommodate others, even when it hurts. But somewhere along the way, we confuse tolerance with virtue. Machiavelli would disagree. He would say, a ruler must know when to forgive and when to let silence punish. Because silence is not emptiness, it's evidence. Evidence that a line was crossed and that your peace costs more than someone else's comfort. So stop clinging to politeness like it's armor. Start treating it like a tool and know when to put it down. Because the truth is, the more you try to avoid conflict, the more you attract the kind that never ends. The kind where you suffer in silence, unnoticed, and unheard, under the weight of keeping it all together. Machiavelli saw this clearly. He knew that power doesn't disappear all at once. It drips out through every tolerated insult, every fake smile, every unspoken truth. And one day, all you're left with is a version of yourself you barely recognize. Quiet, agreeable, invisible. But it's never too late to stop, to pull back, to say nothing, and walk away. Because peace isn't avoiding conflict. Peace is refusing to let your dignity be trampled just to keep others comfortable. There's a moment we've all faced. You draw a boundary, quietly, respectfully. You say no. You take space. You expect a certain level of respect, care, or effort. And then guilt creeps in. You start second guessing. Was I too harsh? Did I overreact? Maybe I should have been more understanding. And that's how it begins. The slow, humiliating erosion of your self-worth. The fifth mistake Machiavelli would have screamed to warn you about is this. You apologize for having standards, not because your standards are wrong, but because you've been conditioned to believe that asking for more makes you difficult, that protecting your peace makes you arrogant, that demanding respect makes you cold. But Machiavelli knew better. He knew that standards aren't walls, they're filters. And when you lower the filter, you let everyone in, including the ones who will eventually destroy you from within. You're not hard to love. You're just unwilling to beg for the kind of love that comes with terms and conditions. And yet, every time you ask for consistency, you're made to feel demanding. Every time you expect effort, you're told you're expecting too much. Every time you prioritize yourself, you're labeled selfish. So you shrink, you soften, you rewrite your needs until they look like compromises. You disguise your pain as patience. And then you wonder why you feel invisible in your own relationships. But here's what Machiavelli would say. A prince who bends his law for the approval of his subjects invites rebellion. And you bend your emotional laws for approval. You let people rewrite your expectations like they're suggestions, not boundaries. And once your standards are negotiable, they stop being standards. Let me ask you this. Why are you the one always folding? First, why are you the one who apologizes when others cross the line? Why do you explain your silence as if it's a crime? Because deep down, you've been taught that being respected is less important than being accepted. But Machiavelli warned us, power isn't about being loud. It's about being unmoved. When you say, this is what I expect, and you don't flinch when others challenge it. When you say, I will not tolerate this, and follow through no matter who walks away. When you say, I deserve peace, and refuse to justify why, that's power. That's leadership. That's self-respect in its purest form. And yes, it makes people uncomfortable. But that discomfort is where clarity begins. That tension is where people learn how to treat you, not through your words, but through your enforcement. You think apologizing makes you relatable, but what it really makes you is replaceable. Because when you water yourself down to fit someone else's glass, don't be surprised when they drink you and feel nothing. Your standards are not the problem. The problem is believing you need to explain them. The problem is trying to make them palatable. The problem is compromising what keeps you sane. For people who wouldn't bend a single rule for you, Machiavelli knew that rulers are respected not for their flexibility, but for their clarity. And clarity without apology is terrifying to those who benefit from your confusion. So no, don't soften your standards for love. Don't dilute your worth to fit in. Don't apologize for expecting loyalty, presence, effort, honesty. You're not asking for too much. You're just asking the wrong people. And here's the truth. No one wants to say. Sometimes the only reason they call you too much is because you've stopped being easy. You've stopped being emotionally convenient. You've stopped being endlessly patient. You've stopped abandoning yourself for the illusion of connection. And that scares them, because now they have to rise to meet you or fall behind. And watch, you walk away. So don't apologize. Don't explain. Don't second guess the very standards that are saving your life. Because Machiavelli was right. Power is never handed to those who ask nicely. It's claimed by those who know what they're worth. And never let anyone convince them otherwise. Rejection, even the word stings. It's not just the fear of someone walking away. It's the fear of what their absence says about you. The fear that if they don't choose you, maybe you were never worth choosing in the first place. And that fear begins to shape everything. You change how you speak, so you won't sound too bold. You adjust how you feel, so you won't seem too intense. You hold back on saying no, on setting limits, on being fully you, because you're terrified it might push someone away. And in doing so, you don't just lose people, you lose yourself. This is the sixth humiliating mistake Machiavelli would have warned you about, letting the fear of rejection control your identity. Because the moment you start bending to avoid discomfort, the moment you tiptoe around your truth just to be accepted, you're no longer the one in charge of your life. Your fear is you become a negotiator for your own soul, offering pieces of yourself in exchange for company. But Machiavelli would have said, a ruler who who fears losing their kingdom has already lost it, because fear, when it governs you, robs you of the very qualities that command respect. Here's what makes this even more dangerous. You don't even see it happening. You call it being flexible. You call it compromise. You call it keeping the peace. But deep down, it's submission. It's self-abandonment dressed up as diplomacy. And what's worse, you're doing all this for people who haven't even proven they deserve access to you. You give them the power to define your worth, to determine your moods, to decide whether or not you matter today. And for what? For a text back? For someone's lukewarm attention? For a version of love that comes only when you're easy to manage? Machiavelli would have called that emotional slavery, because you're not living, you're performing. Performing kindness, performing peace, performing love in hopes that you'll be kept. But here's the truth. Anyone who only stays when you silence your truth was never staying for you. They were staying for the version of you that made them feel safe, superior, or entertained. And when you finally break character, they leave, not because you changed, but because you finally showed up. And that's when you learn something brutal. That being rejected for your truth hurts, but it's nothing compared to being accepted for your mask. Machiavelli believed in controlled exposure. He warned that too much vulnerability, too soon, with the wrong people, isn't courage, it's sabotage. So stop giving your rawest self to those who've never earned it. Stop offering your soul to people who only deserve your surface. The fear of rejection is real. But here's the irony. It's the fear itself that keeps you trapped. Because the moment you fear rejection more than self-betrayal, you begin rejecting yourself first, just to make sure they won't. But let me ask you, what's the point of being accepted if the price is your silence? What's the point of being wanted if you have to twist yourself to be desirable? You want real power? Be willing to be misunderstood. Be willing to be left. Be willing to say, "This is who I am," and watch who stays when the performance ends. Because the ones who can't handle your boundaries were never strong enough for your presence, and the ones who disappear when you stop chasing, they weren't connections, they were distractions. Machiavelli knew that presence isn't about being loved, it's about being felt, and those who are felt deeply, unforgettably, are never the ones begging to be included. They're the ones who walk away with dignity, even if it means walking alone. And that's the moment the world shifts. When you no longer contort yourself to stay in a room. When you stop fearing the silence after you speak your truth. When you accept that being alone with your integrity is more powerful than being surrounded by people who only love the watered-down version of you. That's when your power returns. That's when fear loses its grip. That's when rejection stops feeling like death and starts looking like divine redirection. Machiavelli would say, "The one who can walk away without fear rules the room." So walk, not to escape, but to evolve. There comes a time when words do more harm than good, not because they're wrong, but because they're wasted. You explain yourself again. You defend your choices again. You try to fix what's been broken with reason, logic, and compassion again. But Machiavelli would shake his head and say, "Power is not explained. It is imposed. by presence, not persuasion. The seventh humiliating mistake is this. You try to explain what should only be communicated through silence. And this is how it happens. Someone disrespects you, and instead of withdrawing, you explain. Someone ignores your worth, and instead of leaving, you plead. Someone crosses your line, and instead of closing the door, you justify why the line matters. But here's the problem. Every time you explain what should be a non-negotiable, you don't clarify the boundary. You undermine it. Because in the social realm, over-explanation is often read as doubt, and doubt is a crack, and cracks invite challenge. You see, silence is not passive. It's not avoidance. It's strategy. Machiavelli knew this. He understood that when you respond to every insult, every misunderstanding, every act of disrespect, you lose not just energy, but position, because people are watching, and when they see you chasing validation after every conflict, they don't think you're emotionally aware. They think you're emotionally vulnerable. They don't see someone who values peace. They see someone who can be pulled back into chaos with a single push. Silence, on the other hand, is a statement. It says, I've already decided. I don't owe you more. My boundary isn't up for negotiation. And that unsettles people more than any argument ever could. You want someone to feel the weight of your presence, then show them the gravity of your absence. When you remove your words, your attention, your reaction, you reclaim control. You stop being a participant in someone else's mess. You stop feeding fires that were never yours to extinguish. But most people can't do it. They talk, they type, they try to reason with those who've already decided to misunderstand them. They keep opening the same door, hoping it'll lead somewhere different. And all it leads to is exhaustion. Machiavelli would have told you this. Not all offenses deserve discussion. Some deserve distance. Not every insult needs a reply. Not every betrayal deserves a second chance. Not every misunderstanding is your job to correct. In fact, the need to constantly clarify yourself is a subtle form of self-doubt. It's the belief that unless you explain, people won't see your truth. But those who truly see you don't need the explanation, and those who demand it won't believe you anyway. So hold your silence. Let them wonder. Let them feel the shift when you stop performing and start protecting. Because when words are no longer cheap, people begin to pay attention. When your no isn't followed by 15 sentences of guilt, it becomes powerful. When your boundary is enforced without theatrics, it becomes unbreakable. And most importantly, when you choose not to react, you expose who they really are, not who you've been accused of being. That is psychological warfare at its highest level. Not shouting, not threats, just stillness, precision, and exit without a warning. Machiavelli would call that mastery. And it's not about being cold. It's not about revenge. It's about remembering that your attention is a resource. Your explanation is a privilege. Your reaction is a currency. And not everyone deserves to spend it. So the next time someone crosses the line, don't type, don't talk, don't chase. Withdraw. Let silence say what 1,000 speeches couldn't. Let your disappearance be your defense. Let the echo of your absence replace the noise of your justification. Because respect isn't always won by what you say. It's often won by what you no longer need to explain. So here you are, no longer trying to prove your worth, no longer begging to be understood, no longer explaining what should have always been enforced with silence. You've seen the pattern now. You've felt it in your bones. That quiet exhaustion, that subtle resentment, that haunting question echoing in your mind. How did I get here? You didn't get here all at once. It happened slowly, in smiles that weren't real, in yeses you didn't mean, in apologies you gave for simply existing. And now, you understand what Machiavelli tried to teach the world. Power isn't something you fight for. It's something you stop giving away. You gave it away in your availability, in your over-explaining, in your softness that went unprotected, in your constant effort to be seen, heard, understood, even by those who never intended to see you at all. And here's the brutal truth. Most of them didn't want you. They wanted the version of you that didn't cause friction, that version that stayed quiet, that bent gently, that didn't set standards or enforce boundaries. That version was convenient. That version was manageable. But that version wasn't real. It was the mask you wore to survive spaces that couldn't hold the weight of your truth. It was the character you played so you wouldn't be left behind. It was the you that said, if I make everyone happy, maybe they'll stay. But what stayed? Resentment, exhaustion, emptiness. Because deep down, a part of you always knew if you have to shrink to fit into someone's life, then that life was never built for someone like you. And this is where your transformation begins. Not in noise, not in rage, but in recalibration. You're not here to explain anymore. You're not here to defend. You're not here to fix other people's perceptions of you. You're here to reclaim your internal kingdom. The moment you stop playing the old role, the people who only knew that version of you will feel the shift. They'll call you cold. They'll call you distant. They'll call you selfish. Let them, because that resistance, that's how you know you're evolving. Machiavelli said, a prince must be wise enough to choose allies carefully, but strong enough to stand alone if needed. And that's where you are now. You are becoming someone who does not need the approval of the crowd. Someone who understands that solitude is not punishment. It's a filter. It filters out the ones who only came for the easy parts of you, the ones who admired your kindness, but never respected your strength. From here forward, your silence is no longer hesitation. It's strategy. Your distance is no longer fear. It's sovereignty. Your boundaries are no longer just lines. They are laws, non-negotiable, unwavering, quiet declarations of your self-worth. And here's the final lesson. When you shift like this, everything changes. Not because the world suddenly becomes kinder, but because you become untouchable in the ways that used to hurt you. The things that once triggered you, they roll off your skin. The people who once drained you no longer chase. The chaos you used to fix, you now walk past without looking back. Because when you finally respect yourself deeply, you stop needing anyone else to do it for you. And the moment you embody that, the world adjusts. Not instantly, not easily, but inevitably. And those who once took you for granted, they'll feel the weight of your silence like thunder. They'll remember how available you once were and realize they lost. But you won't be looking back, because this new version of you, the one who no longer explains, no longer overextends, no longer seeks permission to exist, isn't trying to go back. You're not rebuilding the old you. You're replacing them with someone who knows. Respect isn't begged for. It's not negotiated. It's not handed out like charity. It's earned, first from yourself, and then from the world. And when that happens, you walk differently, you speak differently, you breathe differently, not because you're pretending to be powerful, but because you finally are. If you've made it this far, something inside you has already shifted. Not a loud shift, not a dramatic one, but a quiet, undeniable click, like a door you didn't know existed, finally closing behind you, because now you've seen it, the cracks, the patterns, the ways you've given yourself away, piece by piece, in the name of being good, being liked, being safe. And now, that version of you, the overgiver, the over-apologizer, the ever-available, ever-explaining, emotionally exhausted version, is fading, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. You're no longer playing by the same rules, because you now understand what Machiavelli understood long before this modern world pretended that power was about popularity, that real respect is not given by the masses. It is carved from discipline, silence, boundaries, and the courage to be misunderstood. You don't need everyone to clap for you. You need to stop clapping for people who insult your soul with politeness. You don't need more conversations. You need more decisions. You need to stop standing in rooms where you are only heard when you whisper. Stop shrinking to make others feel comfortable. Stop giving reasons for your worth like it's a resume you need to submit. And here's the part no one prepares you for. It gets lonely at first. When you stop explaining, stop softening, stop making yourself small. You lose people. You lose places. You lose comfort. But what you gain yourself. And that gain is irreversible. You start speaking less, but saying more. You start choosing peace over presence. You start noticing who respects your silence, not just your service. And slowly, the world around you begins to reconfigure, because now you move differently, not arrogantly, not harshly, but with that quiet, steady confidence that can't be faked. The kind of confidence that doesn't ask to be seen because it already knows it's unignorable. You walk into a room and people pause, not because you're loud, but because your energy precedes you. They feel the weight of someone who doesn't explain, doesn't chase, doesn't flinch. They feel the shift, and they adjust. That's the mark of someone who has stopped trying to be understood and started embodying respect without saying a word. So now, as this video comes to a close, there's only one question left. What will you stop tolerating? Because that's where this transformation becomes real, not in how much you agree, not in how deeply you resonate, but in what you refuse to return to, refuse to over-explain, refuse to make yourself available to those who wouldn't notice your absence, refuse to apologize for wanting peace, for setting standards, for being too much for people who were never enough for you. Refuse to shrink ever again. Machiavelli was never preaching cruelty. He was preaching clarity. He understood that the world doesn't respond to noise. It responds to structure, to presence, to the subtle fire in your eyes when you know you no longer owe anyone your softness, if it costs your sanity. And that fire, it's yours now, so carry it. From this moment forward, speak less, decide faster, withdraw quietly, and watch how the world starts to orbit differently around you. Not because you demanded respect, but because you became it. And if this video didn't just speak to you, but unlocked you, then leave a comment below and write, "Respect starts in silence." No explanation, no story, just that phrase. So I'll know you're part of the rare ones, the ones no longer asking for permission to exist. And if you're ready to keep dismantling what weakens you, to rebuild the version of yourself that Machiavelli would have written about with respect, then subscribe. Because here, we don't give empty motivation. We give mirrors. And once you see what you've been tolerating, you'll never live the same again. There's something that happens when you finally stop trying to be understood. Silence arrives. It's not empty. It's full, dense with truth, heavy with everything you used to explain away. And in that silence, you meet yourself again. Not the self that learned to be small, not the self that gave pieces away to be accepted, but the version of you that always existed beneath the fear, the noise, the people-pleasing masks. That version, the untamed one, never wanted applause. It wanted peace. And now, for the first time in maybe years, you can feel it. The stillness, the strength, the presence of someone who no longer needs to audition for love or loyalty. Because the truth is, you were never weak. You were just convinced that softness required sacrifice, that kindness meant silence, that humility meant bending. But Machiavelli would remind you, even a lion knows when not to roar. This isn't about becoming cruel. It's about becoming untouchable in the ways that used to break you. It's about walking through the same world, but with a new rhythm, where you don't fight for space. You own it. Where you don't explain why you're gone. Your absence speaks louder than your words ever did. Where you don't beg people to respect your value, you simply stop giving it away for free. And yes, some people won't like this version of you. They'll say you've changed. They'll say you've become distant, cold, even arrogant. But let them talk. You've given enough of your warmth to rooms that only ever left you freezing. Now, you are the fire. You are the line that doesn't move. You are the presence that makes others measure their words carefully because they can no longer predict your response. And that unpredictability, that's not cruelty. That's what Machiavelli called strategic fear. Not the kind that hurts others, but the kind that protects you. Because when people don't know what you'll tolerate, they hesitate before testing you. When they don't know what you're thinking, they pause before speaking. And when they don't know if they still have access to you, they start remembering your value. This is how real power works. Not in domination, but in distance. Not in shouting, but in restraint. Because nothing is more unnerving to someone who once had your full emotional access then realizing they don't anymore. And that's where sovereignty begins, not in a throne, but in a choice. The choice to no longer explain your silence, the choice to stop making room for people who walk in with muddy feet and expect red carpets, the choice to stop being available just because you used to be. And when you live like this, everything about you changes. Your walk, your tone, your energy. People sense that you've seen too much, lost too much, grown too much to ever return to the person who used to tolerate the bare minimum and call it love. That version of you is gone, buried beneath the weight of all the moments you kept your mouth shut when you should have walked away. And now, you're not begging to be heard. You are simply not repeating yourself. That is power. That is healing. That is the echo of someone who has risen from within. So breathe differently now. Move differently. Speak only when it matters, and disappear when it doesn't. Because those who truly matter will never need you to explain your worth. They'll feel it in the quiet. They'll respect it in your absence. They'll remember it in your silence. And when they don't, let them go. Because the real you is not for everyone. You were never meant to be common. You were meant to be consequential.